It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me for PI work, not through Twitter or Facebook or any of these places like that where other people are, seeing those messages. oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me for PI work. Now, today I have a guest with us, Douglas Pike. And he's an ex-boyfriend of Natasha Cornett. As you might recall, they call that story like the daughter of Satan. And I had her mother on the show a couple of times, Natasha Wallen, describing with different kinds of perspectives on Natasha Cornett, who, at 18 years old, with a bunch of kids, they were heading over to New Orleans, and they wound up killing this family here. A very tragic story. And we have Douglas Pike, who's an ex-boyfriend, who's going to give us some background on all this. So, Mr. Douglas Pike, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you. Before we get into the whole story about Natasha Cornett and Natasha Wallen and this whole crew of characters here, tell us about yourself. Who is Douglas Pike?
Well, I am 41. I currently live in Missouri, and I'm a United States postal worker. But before that, I grew up in California, which is where I became familiar with Natasha Cornett and her situation by checking it out online. And I'm basically the type of person that when I want to know something, I find it out. And so I did a lot of research and basically began to write her, and we started a relationship. Unfortunately, since then has ended, but I have a lot of knowledge from the research I've done and the people I've written to trying to help her out. And just basically want to get her story out there so people know the truth. She is not an evil person. Anything that she has done wrong in her life, she has definitely paid her debt to society.
Yeah, it sounded like she had a really rough childhood growing up there. So why don't you give us, why don't you first remind us of what the official story is, why she wound up in prison, and then we'll get into all the stuff you've uncovered from your personal firsthand knowledge with Natasha Cornett.
Well, the official story is that a group of 6 Tennessee teenagers went driving to New Orleans, which on the way they stopped at a rest stop because the girls had to use the restroom, at which time the girls were using the restroom. The 2 of the boys, Jason Bryant and Joseph Resner, ran into and were met by the Vidar Lillelid, who is, from what I have read about him, a very, very decent man, a very devout Jehovah's Witness that just came back from a convention for their religion, which one of the subjects of that convention was to reach out to people and, try to bring them into their religion, kind of like a Mormon would do. And basically he saw them, and they were very normal teenagers for anywhere else except for small towns in the South. If they'd grown up in California, nobody would have blinked an eye. Very black clothes, long hair, very punk band looking. And Vidar approached them and started discussing, and that's when the boys decided that they wanted to upgrade their vehicle and basically pulled a gun and kidnapped Vidar, his wife, and 2 children, Tabitha and Peter, and forced them into their van, where they were driven to a small road, and unfortunately they were murdered very brutally, except for Peter, who actually did survive his injuries, and from what I understand now is actually a successful IT guy He has really conquered his disabilities of being shot in the head and the back. And basically, after the murder, the teenagers all piled in the van together and decided to abandon their idea to go to New Orleans, and essentially decided to go to Mexico to avoid being captured by the police. Jason Bryant was recently let out of a juvenile detention center, so he was on probation, and convinced them that that was the best course of action. They had actually made it across the border, but since they had no paperwork to be in Mexico for an extended period of time, they were turned around in Mexico and sent back to the United States, where they had a very unfortunate incident at the border where the computers were actually down the entire day and people were just being let through. Now, religious people would call it an act of God. Others would just say it's a horrible coincidence, but the moment that van went into the stall, the computers kicked back on, the license plate was run, and they were apprehended by the police. They were then taken to the local jail in Arizona, where they were charged with the crimes and then extradited to Tennessee, where they would have stood trial, but because of financial difficulties in Greene County, were given more of a hearing and a take it or leave it kind of plea deal. They would forego the death penalty if they all plead guilty to life without the possibility of parole, so they did go into it knowing they would never see the outside world again. Like I said, it was kind of strong-armed, which I would be more than happy to get into later on if you would like. But they all accepted the plea. They were all convicted of murder of the 3 family members and attempted murder of young Peter. And they were sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and also an additional 25 years for the aggravated kidnapping, which is where they have been since 1998.
So no one's gotten out?
Nope. There are 2 that have tried. Karen Howell and Jason Bryant were the 2 youngest of them. Karen Howell being 17 and Jason Bryant being 14, which they were minors, and believed that they would be able to overturn the conviction. And they actually recently have tried to challenge their plea, and unfortunately the judge did deny their challenge, and they are still incarcerated.
Yeah. Why don't you give us an idea of what Natasha Cornett's childhood was like?
Well,
you know what? No, let me stop there. How did you come into contact with Natasha Cornett?
Well, like I was saying, I was at the time, it was 2017. I was living in Newport Beach, California, and I was not working and just kind of looking for YouTube documentaries to watch, and I came across one that was talking about the Lillelid murders. I had no idea what it was, and it wouldn't be my normal thing to watch, but for some reason, I was compelled to watch it. Now, unfortunately, I could not tell you the exact title of this documentary because since then I have not been able to find it recently, but it's the only out of all the documentaries that you can find, the most unbiased documentary I've seen that told basically just the facts and did not get into any of the media scrutiny that unfortunately was the nail in their coffins. After watching it, I guess you would say I have a Dudley Do-Right complex, And without really knowing why, I felt extremely compelled to find out how to contact Natasha Cornett, because I felt, after watching that she had gotten a completely raw deal, and she kind of didn't deserve everything that she had gotten. So I found out how to write her, found out what her address and prison ID number were, and I wrote her about 2 pages just telling her kind of who I am, and that I saw the documentary about her, and that I felt bad for her situation, and that if there was anything I could do to help her, that please write me back and let me know. And sure enough, I would say maybe a week later, I started receiving letters from Natasha. Very, very nice letters. Thank you so much. You write so well. Your words are very nice. I doodle a lot, so I did draw little flowers and pictures for her, and we became friends after that.
Well, now, Douglas, have you ever done this before, contacted a prisoner and someone incarcerated?
No, never.
Okay.
Not ever. The most pen pal I had was in Spanish class with a Pedro that was living in Mexico City. That was about it. So I had never done this before. And,
would have been ironic if they ran into Pedro when they were escaping to Mexico.
Right.
They ran over Pedro, too. But okay, but now, so how about since then? Have you contacted any contact with people incarcerated since then?
No, just Natasha, because we kind of hit it off and became fast friends.
Okay, so then what does she tell you? What did she tell you? And was this all through writing, or was there phone calls too?
It started through writing, and I then found out that about the JPay phone calls that you could do, and so we did have the occasional phone call. Now, I'm just a lonely postal worker, so I don't have infinite amounts of money, so I wasn't able to do it as much as I would like to, but the letters were easy enough to go back and forth, and I had no problem helping her out, sending her stamps, and writing materials, envelopes, things like that, so we could chat. And, she would ask me about who I am and things like my dog George and, where do I live? And I would send her pictures and things like that and make her drawings. And
what were you sending her money to?
I would occasionally, if she said she really needed it, send her, $30 for her commissary thing. But it wasn't an always thing, because she knew I didn't have a lot of money. But
and it's very expensive too. Even corresponding or having phone calls with people incarcerated, it's a whole industry. Yeah, it is, just.
But you find ways to make it special for them. She had told me that one of her favorite scents that she can't smell anymore is the smell of honeysuckles. So I actually found honeysuckle oil, and I kind of put it on the paper and let it dry, and then mailed it to her. So, things like that. And
nowadays you can't even do that in most places. They scan it now because people are soaking drugs into the envelopes and the letters.
No, I definitely had to let it dry first.
So they scan it now. In some institutions, some places, I suppose, they still let mail come in, good old paper mail. So what did she tell you happened that day, man? Or what did she what did she tell you that happened that day?
Well, it really started with the night before, which, just like any other teenager, they wanted to hang out and drink and have fun and kick back and do their thing, which Natasha and her friends, with the exception of Jason Bryant, but like I said, I'll get into that later, he was the new addition to their group, and he was the X factor in this entire situation. And basically, her and her friends were typical teenagers in the late 90s. The goth, the people say blood rituals, but the but the hemophilia or blood fascination, that was typical. I don't know any girl that I hung out with in high school that didn't at least experiment with it. The cutting, again, teenage girls, they get depressed, they cut, they've at least done it once. I can't say that I knew any girl growing up in high school that didn't do it. Same thing with the Wiccanism, which, unfortunately, again, she grew up in the South in a small town, which made that, devil worship. But it's not. And Wiccanism is about nature. It's about balance. It's about respecting nature. Everything has a purpose. There are stars in it, which are pentagrams, not pentacles, which is more of the Satanist thing, the upside down pentacle. And it would be so common in a place like California or Las Vegas or any big major city. It would be so common. There are teenagers walking around all the time in the mid-'90s that are wearing all the black and the black hair and the black lipstick and saying that they're, Wiccan witches and they do the cutting. It would be so common.
Yeah, but
for anywhere
Douglas
else
too. But it was common too in these rural areas too. There were many kids down there dressed this way. They were heavy
not
metal,
in the Bible Belt.
Oh yeah, come on, man. Of course.
But those are the guys that grew up with the very religious parents that saw that as devil worship. It wasn't as common. I mean, yes, it did happen. I mean, obviously, Natasha and her friends, it was 5 people right there that all had the same kind of look to them. They all found each other. But Natasha went through so many schools, being called a freak, being taunted by teachers and students. Why? Because she dressed differently? That's a very small town kind of thing, and it wasn't fair. But she was the one that was basically hurt by this because she had to leave. Nowadays, with the things that have been going on, do you think Natasha would have been the one that would be kicked out of school? No.
But she had a really
that bully would have been kicked out of school, not her.
Yeah, very poor childhood in a trailer. Her mother very unstable. No father. And there was, the mother said to me they were doing witchcraft and Ouija boards and stuff in that house.
Well, again, Ouija boards, it's a fascinating thing for a teenager. I know I was fascinated by it, and especially with her and Karen. I mean, they contacted and did things, and they got messages, and if it was real, if it wasn't, it was real to them. Now, I believe in the spiritual world, and I believe that contacting someone with a Ouija board is possible if you believe it can actually happen. Now, they actually met somebody, and I can't remember his name, but it was somebody that when they used the Ouija board would be in contact with them often. So it really became real for them because this was somebody that they chatted with and had full conversations with. So it was real to them. Just
and
because
what about
her mom didn't have the same experience doesn't mean it's not real to them.
And what about the visits to Anne Rice? With this,
again, every teenage girl loved the Interview with the Vampire. They all loved Anne Rice. So if I was growing up that close to New Orleans, I would have gone down there.
But didn't the Madonna Whalen tell me that she actually visited Anne Rice's house?
She was not able to meet Anne Rice herself, but she did find out where it was. But unfortunately for her and her friend that went down there, they had used up all their money, and there was just the two of them. And now this was the second trip down to go see Anne Rice? No, this was the first one. This is the first one, okay. This was before everything had happened. It was just her and a friend that went down there because they wanted to get the heck out of Pikeville. Natasha had just her husband, Steve Cornett, who was married to her for 6 months, had just one day split, gone, no word, no nothing. She actually never was able to talk to him again. She was devastated. She couldn't be in that little town. She was suffocating. She needed to get out and not think about it. So her and a friend went down there, and fortunately they ran out of the money they took with them, and the friend's mother found out where they were and went down and took her friend home, but left Natasha there. Not only left Natasha there, they took her bags with them.
Now, that's the first trip to New Orleans.
Nothing, and she was living on the street.
So she had to be younger than 18 then. Oh, that was the first trip to New Orleans.
Yes.
How old was she then?
And I believe she was 16 or 17, right around then.
Okay, so then what did she say?
Because that's when she married, right after she married Stephen.
Okay, so then what happens? I guess you said the night before, they trashed the hotel room, and...
Okay, well, yeah, going back to the night before the incident. Okay, so there is a lot of misnomers about that night. And again, the more details I'd be more than happy to get into later. The misnomers were led by the media by her first attorney, Eric Kahn, who started this devil worship thing. Yes, they did have a party there. Yes, they did trash the hotel room. No, they did not burn 666 into the ground. Yes, there were burn marks in the ground, but it was one of those situations where somebody would go, if you look this way, that could be a 666, but it wasn't. It was, yes, they trashed her. They were teenagers. They were stupid. They were drinking. They were messing around. Her and Karen were doing their cutting thing. They're teenage girls. They had boys there. They were drinking and doing stupid stuff. That's what teenagers do. They get in trouble. That's how adults learn, is they learn through trial and error. Any adult you see now, and you ask them, would you ever do that? Well, when I was a little young, that's what they were. They did not do devil worship. They did not do a blood ritual. They were just doing their own thing. They were in a place where they were safe. They could be themselves. Karen and Natasha, yes, they did do something. That was their release. Now, from what I understand, because I've never done that myself, is people that are that depressed and in that much emotional pain, it begins manifesting as physical pain. So what they do is they cut themselves to control the pain that they're feeling, and it makes the internal pain feel better. It's like a release so that they can feel better. It wasn't about pleasing a demonic god. It was about being in a situation where they could be themselves and not have to worry. Did they do stupid things? Yes. They trashed the hotel room. They shouldn't have. And the next day, they knew that they were going to be in trouble because they had done it before. And they knew they were going to have the police called on them. So they decided they needed to get out of town. And Natasha's close friends, Dean, Crystal, Karen, Joe, knew about her trip to Louisiana, and it was suggested, why don't we go here? Now, the incident that happened to Natasha beforehand, where she was violated by 5 different men when she was living on the streets, made her very, very cautious about going to a place like that, a bigger place, not a small town where you know everybody, but a bigger place where anything can happen. She did not want to go without some sort of protection. So she was not overly keen on the idea of going down there anyway, but she had told them she wouldn't go without a gun. Personally, I think she probably said that because she didn't really want to go and she didn't think they would be able to find one anyway, but they were able to. One of the boys' friends had a gun that he had let them have, and Karen Howe was the only one of them that really had a regular job babysitting, and she had saved, I believe, something like $500, and so she was the only one that actually had money. So when they went to Karen's house to get the money, Jason Bryant had noticed the gun cabinet that they had in her dad's study and took a 9mm out of that. So now they had 2 guns. Unfortunately, from what I was understanding, from what I have been told about her story, they weren't aware of the second gun until that incident happened. They only knew about the first one. But they had all gone to Natasha's house to get some of her things. They were, as her mom said, zombie-like, walking single file. They were worried that the longer they stayed in Pikeville, the higher chance they have of, sheriff's department rolling up on them and them being arrested.
Yeah.
Which didn't happen. They were able to drive out of Pikeville and hit the road.
Did they own this car? Whose car was it?
This was, if I remember correctly, it was Jason's mother's car that he drove. So basically a car he had access to. It was a blue Chevy Citation, which I don't know if you know about the blue Chevy Citation. It is basically a 4-door Chevy Sprint. It is a tiny little car, especially when you have 6 teenagers crammed into it. It is a very, very uncomfortable little car. And they started driving. They had gotten something to eat at a local restaurant. They started driving. We're heading down the road. And at some point, as they went into Tennessee, Karen Howell said she needed to use the restroom. Can they pull over? And so Natasha had said, I could probably use the restroom too. So the boys really had no choice because they were outnumbered now. And said, okay, and pulled over to a rest stop. And basically that's where they met the Lillelid family. Now, a single fact that was definitely overlooked when they were convicted was Natasha and Karen went straight from the car to the restroom. Jason and Joseph wandered around, and they actually ran into Vidar beforehand. When Natasha and Karen had finished using the restroom, they went back to the car and had a cigarette and were just kind of hanging out, where they noticed in the parking lot a great big family van sitting right there. Now, being cramped in that car for what I can only assume would be an hour or two, Natasha and Karen were sitting there smoking, and one said to the other in a jokingly manner, maybe we should steal that van. Now, everybody jokes around with their friends and says things that they don't mean. I highly doubt Karen or Natasha would have actually gone and stolen the van, and they had no way of knowing that that was Vidar Lillelid's van. They just saw the van in the parking lot near their car and thought of the last couple of hours they had in that citation and thought, oh, how comfortable would it be to be in this big roomy van for the rest of the trip. So that is when they looked around and wondered where everybody else was and saw Joseph and Jason talking to a well-dressed, clean-cut man and his family further down by picnic tables. And Natasha turned to Karen and said, we should probably go see what this is about. I don't have a good feeling. So Natasha went over to investigate what was going on. Now, Vidar, like I had said before, he was a very clean-cut man. He was a Jehovah's Witness, a very devout Jehovah's Witness. And he had just come from a convention.
Right, he was trying to proselytize to them to get them to convert to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Exactly.
Right. So, okay, but then ultimately, though, they wind up. Well, why don't you finish it? What happens here with the family?
So they're talking. Natasha and Karen go up there, and that is when they find out what's going on. They're discussing, and at that point, Natasha and Karen meet Tabitha, their little daughter, who Tabitha is a very sweet young girl, and meeting the two girls offered them a Hershey's kiss. Mm-hmm. Very sweet thing to do to a stranger. Natasha instantly felt a connection with this child. So keep that in mind, because the next thing that happened was Joseph pulled a gun and put it on the table and told Vidar, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to take your vehicle and you're going to have to come with us. Natasha was in shock, as was Karen. Jason Bryant, I feel kind of relished at the opportunity to exert his masculinity, and the Lillelid family was escorted back towards the van, where Karen and Natasha kind of told him, why are you doing this? We could just take the van. We don't need to do this. We don't need to hurt them. We don't need to do anything. And basically they were overruled by the two boys with, the one gun, because the other one was still in their car. And they were overruled and said, no, this is happening, so you got to get with it. Now, again, like I had mentioned earlier, Natasha had just felt a connection with this young girl. And Natasha is a very caring person. You could ask any one of her true friends, anybody that she has met in the prison system. She is a very caring person. She cares about her friends.
Well, but wait a second, Douglas. If you want to go there, if you want to bring up her relationship to the prison systems, there was another murder in the prison that she was present at this other murder
but,
too. Okay.
Again, that wasn't her doing. That was Krista. That was Krista Pike, which ironically was one of the reasons she thought about not writing me back, because we shared the same last name. Krista Pike is a crazy person.
Okay,
that
but
loves
the thing
killing
is, okay, you can't say she got along great with everyone in the prison when she was there present at the murder of another prisoner in her unit there. There was only 3 of them there, and one of them wound up dead, and 2 of them are alive.
Okay, at first, I will admit that she did have a really rough time, because I don't know if you know anybody in the prison system, but anybody that's associated with killing children is instantly targeted by the population.
I'm intimately familiar with all this stuff. Now, okay, but now back to the incident there at the rest stop, okay?
But it was getting to the point that Natasha could have gotten in the Chevy Citation with Karen and Dean. I'm sorry, Crystal and Dean, and rode with them. But she was worried that the other boys would do something to hurt this family. She did not want that. She did not want them to get hurt. She had pleaded with the boys, let's just take the van. We don't need to hurt them. Just leave them here. We can take the van. But they wouldn't have it. So she went in the van because she was concerned that they were going to do something to this family, and she was not going to allow it. Now, Joseph drove the van down to a hollow road, pulled over, and the family got out of the van. Now, from what I understand, Dean and Crystal never got out of the Chevy Citation. They stayed. And the Lillelids were lined up near a ditch, where, since Joseph was driving, Jason Bryant now had the gun and was pointing it at them and asked, what should we do with them? Should we let them go or should we kill them? To which Joseph Reisinger replied, I think we should kill them. Natasha freaked and stood in front of a loaded gun in front of somebody in her group and said, no, you can't kill these people. It's not right. You can't kill these people. To which Jason Bryant, with the gun pointed now at Natasha, who's standing between them, had told her, move or I'm going to kill you too. Now, the public, as you may or may not know, will always love a dead martyr before a courageous woman who could have done more. So Natasha thought of what she could do, and the only thing she could come up with was negotiating with him. So she begged him, at least don't kill the children. Please, whatever you do, don't kill these children. To which Jason told her he wouldn't do anything, but that turns out to be a lie, because as soon as he gets out of the way, he shoots Vidar, he shoots his wife, and he shoots the 2 children. Coming up on them, realizing they are not dead yet, he decides and says they're not effing dead, and decides to shoot them again. So he shoots them again. At this point, Joseph has already gone to the car and got the other gun and joined in with it. Natasha went into shock. She didn't know what to do. She was devastated. This little girl who was so sweet to her is now lying there dead in a ditch. She was in a zombie-like trance. Anybody that has seen a horrific thing like that can tell you that you go into shock. You don't know what you're doing. I know when my own father died and I found him, I went into shock. I apparently smoked a whole pack of cigarettes and didn't even remember having one of them. But again, she was in shock. Everybody wanted to get the heck out of there. So they piled everybody into the van and decided to leave the Chevy Citation, but not before taking everything out, including the license plates, and hit the road.
Wait, am I confused, or wasn't one of the victims run over too?
But that's what I was getting to.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, yeah.
Joseph was driving, and as they had started out going, they had noticed through this, it's a hollow, so it's like a bunch of trees, and he had noticed a house off in the distance in the hollow. And this is up for debate because, again, it's a hearsay thing. Joseph says that he swerved because he wasn't paying attention. Jason Bryant said he swerved into it on purpose and ran over the bodies, which unfortunately sealed the fate of poor Tabitha, and it also mutilated their parents. Now, that is a disgusting, horrific thing to such a lovely family. And I cannot say enough how horrified I was for them, because that is just a terrible, terrible thing to lose everybody.
Let me ask you a couple of questions.
But it wasn't Natasha that did it.
Let's back up a little bit here. Now, this car, this Chevy, the blue Chevy, was that ever reported stolen?
There was. It was not reported stolen right away.
But ultimately, it was.
There was ultimately it was,
okay.
But the reason that they gave, being that it was their own son driving the car, and that they were looking for a teenager because it was actually Jason's family that was looking for him, that called it in. The cops kind of gave it, they gave it lip service and, okay, we'll take care of it. But it never went wide. There was never a bolo put out.
Now, what about the firearms?
So they were in a completely different state.
The firearms that turned up missing, were they ever reported stolen?
I don't believe they were, because as far as the one stolen from Karen's house, they didn't realize that it was gone until after they found out what had happened.
Okay. But they were never charged with the stealing that firearm?
No.
Could have been.
As far as I can remember.
It could have been. Now, what about
definitely could have been.
Right. Now, that's the point I'm getting to. Now, what about this 14-year-old? Was there any kind of charges about endangering a minor or exposing? They gave this minor alcohol and drugs, right?
They didn't officially charge him with that, because
what they charged him with
was
the minor?
Tennessee that was charging them. It was the 3 murders and the attempted murder of Peter, and aggravated kidnapping, which is a blanket thing that they all got.
Yeah.
But the endangering the child and all that, giving him alcohol, that was something they did in in Kentucky,
Gotcha.
not Tennessee, so they wouldn't have been able to charge him anyway.
Well, but the thing is, my point is, okay, when you have a homicide committed in concert with another crime, everyone there is guilty of that homicide. Even if they didn't pull the trigger. I had a case once.
By the law, is not technically true, because you can be charged with accessory to homicide by being there, especially in the late 90s, because it hasn't been amended, and modified the way it has recently.
No, trust me on this. Even
we're talking about mid to late 90s.
I'm telling you, in the 80s, okay? Because I can tell you a case we had where the guy he stole some marijuana. He killed a guy when he stole the marijuana. And then later on that day, people he sold that marijuana to who had no idea of the initial homicide were charged in that homicide. So stuff happens. There's all kinds of stuff.
If they would have gotten a better lawyer, they could have gotten it down to...
Well, that's a whole other story.
Accessory to homicide after the fact, unless they were physically there. I mean, if you just sold them the weed.
But my point is for you here is that even the case you're making here, she's on the hook for these homicides, man. She's on the hook for these, man.
And that is something that I have looked into. Again, if she would have had decent representation, that the fact that she was the only one out of the other 5 that tried to prevent it, that had to count for something. And if she had
in sentencing, that would have counted for something in sentencing.
She could have gotten, in worst case scenario, accessory to murder, which only carries in Tennessee a 25-year sentence.
Yeah. I got to tell you,
so
man.
She would be out by now, but she would have still gone in then.
A criminal defense investigator for 40 years, man. Okay, I don't see how you're getting out of these charges, man, or getting any kind of a less of a sentence than they've got.
Well, you have to realize the situation that their incarceration, all 6 of them being together, put on the county, Greene County. Greene County is not a very rich county.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And now they have these 6 kids that were apprehended coming back across the border in Mexico, and they were apprehended in Arizona and extradited to Tennessee. Now, before I get into that, when they were apprehended in Arizona, it became news because it had already been news. This family was found brutally murdered off in this hollow, run into a ditch and mutilated. So it was news already. And when they apprehended him, it went on the news that they had apprehended the suspects and that they're going to be extradited, to which a gentleman by the name of Eric Kahn, who was a lawyer out of Kentucky, not Tennessee, and in my opinion is basically a con man with a law degree, went to Madonna Wallen's house, which is Natasha's mother, and approached her about representing Natasha. Not the other way around. She didn't call around looking for lawyers that would represent her. He came to her and said, I want to take this case. I want to take care of her. Next thing she knows, he went to Arizona to meet with Natasha. They're going to be extradited. He learned about her and went back to Tennessee, where, for whatever god-awful reason, decided to go to the press before they even got back, and was telling them that there's group, and he's already made up this whole story about devil worship and how there was a ritual sacrifice. Now, you have to realize, this trial was 3 years after the O.J. trial. Media coverage on this sort of thing, especially this horrendous, was crazy. He gave them a story that they could sink their teeth into, and they ran with it. They were tried in the court of public opinion, tried and convicted before they even got back to Tennessee. There was a gas station with 6 nooses. There was people ready for vigilante justice. Hang them on the highest tree, they said. Don't give them a trial. They don't deserve it. That is a horrible, horrible thing to do. And why? So that this guy, Eric Kahn, can make a name for himself. Did you know he had actually contacted a producer in Hollywood to try to sell the movie rights to the story? He is an awful, awful person.
No, I got to tell you, Douglas, yeah, that's not all that uncommon either, you know? Let me ask you a question.
He hadn't even been back in Tennessee yet.
No, I know.
He's already flooded the news with this evil girl, Natasha, who is the mastermind of the whole thing. And he's already trying to make a buck off of it. That is, if he was any lawyer anywhere, he would have been disbarred for that. But it was such a horrific murder. that people didn't think about it. And they just
it was a
ran with the
horrific
story.
murder. It was a horrific murder, okay? The shooting alone was a horrific crime, but it was associated with a half a dozen other crimes, which she also willingly participated in. Even the trashing of the hotel room.
She was railroaded into it.
Sorry?
Okay. When they got back to Tennessee, like I said, the Greene County was not a rich county. They couldn't afford doing 6 individual trials. Now, according to the testimony they'd all given, Jason Bryant was the one that did the main shooting associated with Joseph Reisner. Jason Bryant admitted to the shooting in Arizona, but since he wasn't Mirandized, it was now inadmissible. They could not use it. So now what they have is this 14-year-old that they know killed people, but they can't use his confession because it's inadmissible now, and they can't kill him because he's a minor. They can't execute him because they didn't do that then. And now they have these 6 people to which the person who they know is the killer is going to get off, or at least not die. So they came up with an idea. Instead of having 6 trials where people will see this person got off, that person got off, people were ready for blood. They decided, let's strong-arm them. These are kids. We'll give them a blanket plea deal. We'll tell them, look, if you go to trial, you're dead. There's no chance that you're not going to die, which is not the truth. If they had decent representation, there's a chance they wouldn't die. They may not have gotten off. They might have had a lesser sentence, but they might not have died. But their choice was death or life in prison where you're never going to see the sun again. That was their only choice. Now, most of them had agreed to it. Natasha was hesitant, but again, these 4 other people, they were her friends. She felt bad, and she did it out of guilt. She signed the confession because that's what everybody was doing, and she didn't want to see them get in any worse trouble.
They took a plea deal in order to avoid the possibility of more penalties, which is definitely, by the way, too. If they wanted to start charging them with all this stuff, like I'm telling you, endangerment, providing, if they wanted to charge them with all that stuff, they would have been they would have been life without parole, 100%.
Well,
yeah. If they would have went to trial on that.
If they're going to go with endangerment, they always go with the oldest person, which would have been Joseph Reisner, not Natasha. He was the oldest.
But they were all involved in this conspiracy of the commission of all these crimes, the stealing the cars, stealing the weapons, traveling over state lines.
They also realized that
with a minor.
Jason Bryant was only 14. They can't execute him, and if he had a decent enough attorney, he might only go to juvenile court, or he might get a light sentence.
You're right. The 14-year-old,
they weren't going to have that.
The 14-year-old, you could make a case that he was a victim. He was provided drugs and alcohol by these older adults.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, again, they had this confession that they can't use.
But Douglas, you're not here advocating for that 14-year-old. You're here on my show advocating for Natasha Cornett. Okay.
He's the one that killed those poor people.
But listen,
he pulled the trigger. Honestly, in the 90s, how common was it for a teenager to be diagnosed with that? Sorry.
Here's the thing.
How common was it for a teenager to be diagnosed as a sociopath? Not at all, because sociopath diagnosis is very difficult in young people. In fact, most doctors won't even touch a diagnosis of sociopathy until after they're 18.
Well, let me ask you a question, Douglas.
Child, from his past record and what happened, he fits the description of a sociopath. He had no remorse for these killings.
We're running out of time here. We've only got a little bit of time left. What is it that caused you and Natasha to have go your separate ways?
We had started seeing each other after she had another person that was writing her that she was in a relationship with that she realized was using her, and she had broken it off, and we were friends, and I think it was about 6 to 8 months into our writing back and forth and being friends that we decided that we had feelings for each other. And so that lasted another year or so, 2 years, actually. And I didn't understand then what I understand now, is that I felt kind of like she was using me because she needed things. But what I didn't understand is the life she's had to live in prison, and that she was doing what she had to survive there. Now, call it a Dudley Do-Right complex, call it whatever you have. When I tell somebody I love them, even if I break up with them, they're always going to be here in my heart. So I still do whatever I can to help her. I just haven't actually talked to her in a while, and that's my fault because she was upset that we broke up.
And what motivated you to want to come on the show and give this side of the story?
I heard the podcast that you did with Madonna, and I was actually talking to her, even though I know she couldn't hear me. Wait, why didn't you mention this? Why didn't you mention that? In fact, there's so much more to the story about how she got railroaded in the trial, how she was abused by both her attorneys. There's so much more to her story than we actually had time for that I wish I could tell you. But when I heard that, again, I felt the same compelled feeling that I had when I first wrote her, that I need to help her because she doesn't deserve the life she's living now.
Okay, I'm familiar with the first attorney. You're right. He came up with that story. He was going to go for an insanity plea, and he came up with the satanic story there. He wasn't a criminal defense attorney experience.
He used her sexually.
Oh, no, I don't know about that. But now what about your allegation against the second? By the way, you only heard that from Natasha. You really didn't know that.
No, I heard that from Natasha and Madonna.
Yeah.
The second attorney was Stacey Street, who was assigned to it and wanted nothing to do with this trial. He told her the day after that she cannot recant or take back her plea deal, which turned out to be not true. He did not want this to go on. He just wanted her to sign the deal, get whatever she's getting, and be out of his life. He did not give her decent representation. In fact, he lied to her because she could have recanted her plea deal, which he lied to her and said, no, you can't do that. You're just going to have to stand with your friends now. It's done. She had confessed to him everything bad that Eric Kahn had done, including the sexual abuse, which attorney-client privilege, taking advantage of a young girl that's scared, that is definitely abuse. You would call that abuse anywhere.
I got to tell you something, man. Like, unless she's filed charges
after learning this,
unless she's filed charges against this attorney regarding any kind of battery,
who would believe her?
Okay, no, but the thing is, unless she has, you don't want to be putting yourself out there making these allegations and getting yourself in a lot of trouble for that.
I would like Eric Kahn. I'm not worried.
Well, okay. Senator, we've been talking to Douglas Pike. Douglas, man, listen, I think you're a good-hearted guy. I can't see any other outcome of these charges, man. You know, I think too, man, if they didn't take this plea deal, they would have charged all these other things, man, and they'd be under the prison. So
now, I'm not necessarily saying that she shouldn't have gone to prison there, because she was there. I agree with you. She was there. It was wrong. She could have gone to prison, but she has been there for over 25 years now. I'm saying that her actions in that situation, she has paid her debt to society. I don't think she should be there anymore.
Well, I got to tell you, man, if you want to advocate for people like that, there's millions of them in prison sitting right now.
I've written the president, both senators, both. Yeah.
Well, I don't mean just for these four defendants. I'm telling you that there's hundreds of thousands of people in prison right now with insane. I was just talking to Joe Exotic the other day. Joe Exotic got screwed. You know, and he's sitting in prison. He got federal charges, man, on conspiracy to commit a murder where nobody died. Okay, this guy got federal charges, man. 97% conviction rate. It's a point system. You don't get any good time. He'd be out if it was state charges. He'd be out a long time ago.
When Natasha and I were still a couple, President Trump Trump pardoned that drug drug trafficker that killed somebody.
No, yeah, Trump's pardons. Yeah, we don't want to get into that. That's a whole.
But he wouldn't do. He would. He was one of the people I wrote.
Yeah.
I wrote everybody trying to get something to help her.
Yeah, if you wanted a pardon from Trump, you need
when I heard
million.
it on the news that she's a drug trafficker. She killed somebody. Oh, you're free to go because Kim Kardashian told him to.
Yeah. Well, Doug, man, we're out of time. We've been talking to Douglas Pike about the case of Natasha Cornett. Go back and listen to the old shows I did with Madonna Whalen, her mom. I did 2 shows with her. I think I was really easy on the mom, too. I wasn't that easy on you, Douglas. I gotta tell you, man. I wasn't that easy on you.
You have to realize her age and the fact she's from a small town, so you were easy on her, but you probably could have been a little bit easier.
Oh, I could have been easier on Madonna, you think?
Just a little bit.
Okay. I'm
not saying you were mean. I'm not saying you were mean. I'm just saying a lot of the things you were saying kind of fast, and she got confused.
Well, then I apologize if that's. I'll go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, but she's a very sweet woman, and I love her too dearly. She is the sweetest woman I've ever met.
She is. Douglas Pike, man, thank you so much.
Not a problem.
Good night, sir.